Hey, welcome back to Piatt Picks, and Anthony Scott Piatt is off to the side here, about to be front and center with some results from our pound-for-pound parlay last week, and then we'll get into the big Jake Paul, Nate Diaz fight this weekend. Anthony, how you doing?
Hey, man, doing great. It's been a wonderful week of and for boxing. I like to point that out. Not just great boxing for us, but also, sort of reach out into the rest of the sports world and general public out there, because these fights are so big and historic and people get so excited about them that it really just brought a lot of energy, and I'm thankful for that. And our pound-for-pound parlay hits. Again, Inoue and Crawford vying for number one in the world. And that's the parlay that we took. Stephen Fulton took a good thrashing from Inoue. And much to the chagrin of some PBC guys out there, Ray, hang in there, buddy. I know it's been a rough week. Spence didn't do well either. Let's put it that way. So we love that. It was a plus 110 on that pound for pound parlay. That got our money back. We put a straight bet on Crawford as well. So we're doing great on those. And Miguel, you and I talked about who could be number one in the world now. We set sort of a metric that we had talked about. Inoue had already won, maybe lost one round, knocked him out in the 8th. So we had kind of said, unofficial agreement here, that if Spence were to win 3 rounds against Crawford, then Inoue was more dominant, and I'm going to stick with Inoue. Spence won 1 round, same as Fulton. Then we said, okay, but then if Crawford knocks him out in the 2nd or 3rd round, then he moves above Inoue. Well, he did it in the 9th. Inoue did it in the 8th. So it's a gray area. Hey, they didn't force me to pick Crawford or force you to pick Inoue, as it were. It both just exceeded expectations. Look, we called these fights pretty much how they were. But really, I think we both thought maybe Fulton and Spence would win about 3 rounds each. Would figure out a way to sort of a war of attrition early. Crawford might be a slow starter. Fulton's a bigger guy. So we called these fights, but they both maybe exceeded a little bit, and that's why it makes it hard. Look, I had Inoue coming in as number one. You had Crawford. I don't think anything happened to change anybody's mind necessarily. Although I am very impressed by what both men did. Crawford did fight a higher pound-for-pound guy, so that argument can be made. Miguel, I kind of mentioned before, look, I don't make the pound-for-pound list that matter. We don't do that, but if I could put them at a tie, I probably would. I'm not mad at anybody that has a Crawford or an Inoue up there. I think Usyk is 3rd. Some folks think Canelo. It gets a little shadier after that. But I think these two are clearly number 1 and number 2 in the world at this point. There are still some PBC guys that don't even have Inoue in their top 10, and it's baffling to me, because clearly Inoue and Crawford, number 1 and number 2. I don't care which order you have them in, and if you're sleeping on Inoue still at this point, come on, watch some film or something, guys. Let's go. This guy's amazing. Crawford's amazing. Let's give the respect where it's deserved, all right? That's how I feel about it, Miguel.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. First, that if you're missing Inoue from your top 10 list at this point, you really should analyze it again, because he's put in the work. I do know, sometimes those lists disrespect the lower weight classes.
Sure.
When you remember, after Mayweather retired, there was some controversy about Chocolatito being the number 1 guy, because he was from such a small weight class and it was kind of unprecedented. And he had his moment where he stood up to being one of the top guys, and people were pleased seeing him. Crawford was always there at around that time. So there's another guy in that mix, I think, is Andre Ward. And so now we've mentioned Mayweather, Chocolatito, Ward, and Crawford. And I think Crawford's the best out of all of those guys.
At this point, it's hard to argue. Yeah.
Ward's a little bit on the defensive end, so he doesn't take as many risks, not as flashy. And Mayweather, you know, he just knocked out Errol Spence, and Mayweather, I believe his last knockout, you'd have to look this up, but I believe his last knockout may have been the Big Show in WWE. So you tell me.
You don't know how timely this is. I just had a discussion with someone online an hour ago, and the question was, you know, you've got Sugar Ray Leonard, Crawford, and Mayweather, and he had Mayweather is greater than Crawford, and Crawford is better than Sugar Ray. And my reply was, you know, strike that, reverse it. To me, Sugar Ray still stands atop, because here's the thing: Mayweather was a king, sure. Sugar Ray was the king among 4 kings. Whether that's circumstances, Mayweather didn't have the opponents. I say he ducked some of the opponents. Pacquiao in his prime would have been a better fight, etc., etc. But look, even if you don't blame Mayweather for not having other greats fighting him at the time, that's how you measure guys, is who they actually fought. And so for me, Sugar Ray's there, then Crawford, and then Mayweather, and it got piled up. Well, if you don't have him number 1 or in your top 5, then you don't know what you're talking about. And so I looked up ESPN list. I believe he's 47th on the ESPN list. I believe Sports Illustrated has Mayweather at 28th. I may have those two transposed. And I started looking through. There are some other lists that have different opinions. That's the beauty of all of this stuff, you know. But I don't want to let, you know, I don't want to overlook the greatness of past eras just because they didn't just happen. And I don't want to say, you know, Crawford, a recency bias, is better than this, that, and the other person going back through Duran and Leonard and whatnot, because it just happened. So, yeah, you know, what era are we in? And some people make the argument you can only say someone's the greatest of their time. Okay, so there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. But it all goes back to, again, these professional pound-for-pound lists have had Inoue and Crawford near the top for a long time. And I think what's dangerous for folks, if you're going to bet money especially, is to say those lists are all opinion. They're really not opinion. The Ring list was the original, and if you take the top 5 or 6, Independent UK and CBS, ESPN, Sports Illustrated, there's a lot to learn there, because when they say Crawford's number 1 and Spence is down that list at 5, 6, and 7, and Fulton is 15 or 20th in the world fighting number 1 or number 2 Inoue, you can't let your biases get in the way. You like a guy because he's from Philly, or you like a guy because of, you know, whatever it is, his nationality, anything like that. You let bias get in the way, you're going to lose money, right? So if you can learn to respect those lists a little bit and understand that they come from a place of guys who do vote for Hall of Fame, guys that make matchups, the ring matchups, and who gets the fight for that belt is a lot of the same people on the pound for pound list. And so these guys know what they're talking about a lot of the time, okay? It's not something to just discount. And I think that happened a lot with people where they put their money on this fight, Miguel, is they now realize, oh, maybe those professionals understood Crawford was the best for a damn reason, you know?
You know, crap on some of the lists as being, you know, something like, for example, you know, how long was Canelo number 1 on the Ring? Because
right.
I believe that Oscar De La Hoya owned that.
Right.
There's always that type of, like, you know, are they receiving money for the placement on the list, et cetera, et cetera. But then you got to realize, like, for example, that might be something some people say about Inoue. You know, that he's been privileged and maybe pays for a spot on the list so that he appears, especially earlier in his career. I think he's earned it by now. But, you know, when he's making appearances earlier in his career, he really caught people by surprise. A lot of people might say the Japanese were paying for their spot. Well, again, now you've got people actually putting money in, so because they see something, some type of talent, if they've never done that. So even then, if they're coming with that type of patronage, you still have to consider them, you know, Other fighters don't have that type. Adrian Broner never had that kind of backing. Even if Mayweather, was supposedly his mentor. Mayweather, wasn't paying for him to be the number one spot or anything like that.
Right.
So Inoue's backers are truly backing him. Why? Because they believe in the talent, and because they want to see how that talent looks on the world level. They love seeing their name in lights. So even if it's bought, consider why.
And when you say bought, though, I mean,
there have been scandals throughout boxing.
There's been scandals, but I think they tried to. You're right, and there are probably ways to influence it. And there's probably a handful of guys on. I don't want to pick on any of them, Ring or ESPN or whatever, that hang out together, have dinner together, in bars together, and say, this I'm really feeling this way, and here's why, and we get to go to the Bahamas and discuss it. If a little insider stuff here and there, I can see that happening. But my point is, they've diversified the voters on a lot of these lists with enough professionals that it would be pretty hard to, pull a dirty trick like that because there's so many people voting on them now.
I like your Rotten Tomatoes take on the list and just look at them all together and try to compile it for yourself. I think that's a good approach because, like you said, you're getting a little something from each one of them.
That's right. Yeah.
But, my feeling on the list is that, there's still a lot of, good old-fashioned corruption on some of them,
Sure.
Or putting a guy too high. Once again, how do you quantify that the manager of Canelo owns the ring list and lists Canelo as number one?
Right.
Was he across the board number one with everybody? No, I don't think so. Not everywhere. So how do you quantify that? Is it really bent towards Canelo, or did they just, argue themselves into he's number one. He's beating 50-0 or whatever, his record is. There's always, that's why the Rotten Tomatoes look, I trust our word more than anyone.
More than anyone, really. And that's true if you're going to go see a movie too. There's know where people are coming from. So if you're reading a review from an outlet that has an agenda, and their agenda is whatever it is, right? They're Mother Earth News. They're going to be writing about the environmental take that a movie made. If they're a right-wing thing, they're going to... So knowing the source, like you're saying, know that the ring being owned by De La Hoya, know that source, factor that in, and then look at a whole bunch of other things. And we're not going to look at one movie review before we go see a movie. I'm going to read several reviews if I'm unsure of what's going on. And that's what we suggest you do here. Having said all that, Canelo being number one or not, Inoue has been on that list, top 5 on almost all the lists. So for him not to be in your top 10 at this point is not a De La Hoya favoring Canelo situation. It's a Inoue fights from Japan on Tuesday mornings at 5 a.m. and I don't blame you for not getting up and watching him, but it's time to see what's going on and put a little respect on the man's name. Basically, type of situation.
I agree completely. If you're missing out, that's the bottom line. Is the guy done everything that's necessary to be on, in the conversation as number one. So,
absolutely. Like I said, he doesn't have to be number one. I'm not mad at anybody. I'm not mad at any of the pros. I'm just suggesting. I don't see him out of the top 2 or 3 in any way, shape, or form. And listen, this is just helpful to the folks that follow us and trail our bets or thinking about making their own bets. Whoever he fights next, be careful. Just don't go, Inoue's not in my top 10 and this other guy is, and go that route. And as far as that goes, for talking about who guys are going to fight next, I'm hearing a lot of talk about Jaron Boots Ennis being the guy that's going to beat Crawford up next. And let me just tell folks now, Crawford better be a minus 400 in that fight when it comes out. That's what I expect on FanDuel. If you think Boots Ennis is going to beat Crawford anytime in the next 3 years, well, let me just give you my Cash App. You send me the money you're about to waste on Jerome Boots Ennis. That is how strongly I feel about both Crawford and Inoue handling their business in whatever comes next over the next 2 years. These guys, they can only beat themselves. I mean, are you going to tell me Crawford's going to fight Tyson Fury? Okay, maybe he's going to lose. Short of that, I mean, Canelo, would Crawford fight Canelo in a super fight? All bets are off at that point. But anybody realistically around 154 and whatnot, Crawford's got those guys. Trust me on this. And Inoue has anybody in his weight class. If you move up to a Tank Davis, again, all bets are off. That's a lot higher weight classes, and that's some of the silliness that people are talking to try and get redemption on their type of fighter, because they're so baffled right now with these losses that they're talking ludicrous stuff. They instantly started talking Tank Davis and Inoue. Let the man be a champion in his own weight class. 5 weight classes up already, for God's sake. Started at 108, right? And has moved all the way up. So the man's great at the weight he is. You mentioned pound for pound earlier and how some of the younger guys or lighter weights don't get the respect. But also keep in mind, Miguel, that these pound for pound lists used to largely exclude heavyweights because it was really originally invented to show how the lighter weight guys would compete at a heavyweight level or at any level. And so a lot of times, and a lot of folks still today, feel that you shouldn't have a heavyweight number one, or it should be very, very hard for a heavyweight to be on the list at all or to be number one. But I think you're right. They disrespect the lower weight classes, and sometimes the heavyweights can't prove themselves in multiple divisions, obviously. A guy like Usyk can easily be on that list because he started at a lighter weight and moved up to heavyweight. But
Fury's been, showing us stylish wins in style boxing, which is kind of what you look for in a pound for pound. You do not want vanilla people. And
I disagree. I disagree that Fury should not be on there. I'm saying it's okay. I mean, I don't mind Fury being on the list personally. But I know that the extremes, the lights and the heavies don't get treated fairly. They just don't.
But we mentioned 2 heavyweights that are kind of special heavyweights right for the moment. The bottom line is that the underclasses, the weight classes, that we're talking about, bantams and lesser, those guys are much higher skilled. The skill package they bring to a fight, the fact that most of them can hold up to 100 punches around round count, things that heavyweights cannot do. Don't do. So there's so much that the little guys are so skilled that should be baked into the pound for pound, and they do get ignored. Chocolatito was almost the exception, and even then you could talk to many boxing people who said, that doesn't count.
Yeah. It's just how it is. And I'm not mad about it necessarily. It's just a strange dichotomy,
But we got great fights this last weekend, and we took home some money. So let's go ahead and what do we got this weekend?
Well, this next weekend coming up, we have the MVP Promotions, I think, with Jake Paul, his company, of course, in running the fight against Nate Diaz, and he manages Amanda Serrano. She has the rematch with Heather Hardy. She's a minus 1,600 favorite in that fight. There's not a lot of money there, obviously. But you and I were able to do a little bit of research and found out that Amanda is a on the books a minus 114 by knockout, but a plus 115 by decision, which to Miguel and I wasn't making a lot of sense. If you look back over Amanda's fights, the past 5 of them, the last knockout she got was Daniela Bermudez, March of 2021. She's fought Mercado, Gutierrez, Taylor, Mahfoud, and Hernandez. Of course, the split decision loss to Taylor, which is amazing, by the way. She went up 2 weight classes to fight Katie and lost a split decision. But nonetheless, the other 4 fights that she won were all by unanimous decision. She didn't knock out Heather the first time. Heather's 26 fights, has lost 2 of them. neither one by knockout. So I'm not sure what people are seeing. If, sort of have a theory on this a little bit, Miguel. Jake Paul, in this whole circus of the internet stars and whatnot, but I will and have given him respect for helping out Amanda Serrano as manager and whatnot. But Jake Paul brings a lot of fans, people that might not follow boxing a lot. Maybe they're putting money on Amanda for the knockout. I'm not sure. I think this line is broken, is what I'm getting at. I think it is Amanda by decision. And, we don't want to put 1,600 to win 100 on money line. So method of victory is the only way to go on that. Amanda by decision looks really good at that plus number. I'll verify what that number is for you. It is by decision plus 130. It's even better than I thought. Minus 115 by knockout, plus 130 by decision. So look, that's a bet that I think, sometimes on these we wait later to talk about bets. I think this is one that may change as we get a little closer. So if you can find Amanda on points at plus 100, it's currently plus 130. If it goes up to plus 150, put plenty on it. That's a really good bet. I just didn't want to let anything go, Miguel, without letting all our listeners know that. So Serrano by points. As far as the other fight, you and I talked about this before. We tried to have some hope for Nate, and I think maybe you still do. And I'd like to see a knockout by Nate. I haven't seen a lot of good signs. I haven't liked Nate's training. He walked out of the presser yesterday. They started talking, and it wasn't heated. Jake Paul was actually complimenting Nate Diaz, how great of an MMA fighter, and he's looking for it. And Nate's just kind of nervous and moving. This sort of anxiety situation was kind of uncomfortable to watch, truthfully. And then he got up and left. The cameras followed him out. He said, "I'll be back." Got in the Blazer or the Suburban and sped away. I think he thinks it's kind of silly to an extent, even though he's part of it. I think he thinks the whole thing is a bit of a circus himself. Look, Nate, I don't know, Miguel. Minus 550 for Jake Paul, a strong favorite. Nate Diaz at plus 350. If you get into the methods of victory, it looks like Jake Paul is favored at minus 135 for the knockout. Diaz for knockout is plus 700 and decision is plus 800. So if you think Nate can catch him, money line he's only plus 350, but the knockout doubles that to plus 700. So if some folks think Nate is going to win by catching Jake Paul, that's a plus 700. Where are you at on this after what you've seen, Miguel? I know you respect Nate's training in boxing. I know you respect his power. Can he get through Jake's shell? I mean, obviously we've seen Jake can't handle a real boxer, but he's beat up every MMA guy thus far. So I'm leaning towards Jake Paul with my head pretty strongly. My heart's with Nate. I kind of hope he does something. If we were going to make a fun bet, don't bet the mortgage, but if we were going to make a fun bet, do we go with the knockout? Do you see Nate possibly winning by knockout if he did win? Miguel, break this one down on your thoughts so I know where, to put a little fun money, let's call it, on this one.
Yeah, there are two big negatives that come out against Nate on my take. And you're right, my tendency is to think his, lifetime in the fight game, he would carry some weight against a guy who's basically put in 3 years. So, but, at 185, Nate was never a 185 pounder. Not a great weight for him. And he has to come up. Now, his conditioning and stuff, he's always been extra conditioned because of, triathlon and stuff like that. And I've mentioned, I know that they, trained as sparring partners for Andre Ward and things like that, him and his brother, that, I thought gave them a good basis in boxing, training with the best guy around. But I just looked it up here. And I'll tell you, you mentioned Nate didn't look himself, was sort of comfortable and stuff. And I'll tell you that Texas, where the fight's going down, is not a recreational marijuana state. So Nate is probably having to not be able to smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what the boxing commission down there would like to enforce. He may have had to not be on his, and I believe that, the joke of marijuana being illegal has definitely affected both Diaz brothers' career. I mean, Nick ate a 5-year suspension for a pot positive. And a lot of the times I think that showing up at press conferences or not showing up at press conferences and things like that has to do with the anxiety.
Yeah.
So that could be an effect here. So Nate doesn't have a smoke where, if you're comfortable, you should probably smoke a couple hours before the fight, just to ease his mind or whatever. If he's that used to it, conditioning isn't going to be affected by that.
Yep.
But if not, then, the carnival goes off in your head, and who knows how you're feeling,
Yeah, and that's something where, and I know, look, some of the older generation or different folks or whatever, and I don't think this is a conservative or a liberal issue, folks. This is just a something that we've come to understand on both sides of the aisle, all around the world. It is an issue where, and look, if you're on the spectrum with like an ADHD or something, and you take a Ritalin or an Adderall, you normalize, right? And college kids or others that take those things to stay up all night, it gives them, a kick. It wakes them up. It's caffeinated, whatever. The same receptors for ADHD, and in California they treat it this way, and in several other states now that legalization is happening, but those same receptors, dopamine, marijuana can lift. So a person with slight ADHD and those sorts of things. So we all look, we all know guys that can smoke and they're fine and they're normal and they go to work and they do great. And then we know that kid at work or whatever, that if he smokes, he's a goofball. And you're like, dude, don't ever smoke pot at work. Ever. You're not the guy, Nate Diaz is clearly one of those guys whose anxiety goes away and he calms down rather than party time. It's not a drug. It's not a party time for guys that are on that spectrum. And Nate's clearly there. And so you're absolutely right. No shame coming from me and obviously from you towards a guy who uses that as his medication, far superior to a lot of the pharmaceuticals that you can use to treat a lot of those different conditions. So I just wanted to throw that out there on the record, not shaming him by any means.
None of that really matters. The facts are that Nate is a pot smoker in public, enjoys it, and is kind of an advocate for it too. I mean, maybe right. On the business at this point, and a few things like that going on.
Mike Tyson type of deal and everything. Yep.
A pothead, like from when he was young.
Yep.
So he's a habitual user, and he can't smoke in Texas.
Yep. That's
so, it. It's highly stressful to a habitual user. Especially one who's got to get down and do what, he's now going to rely on muscle memory and everything like that with a lot of baggage and stuff. So I don't like that. I don't like that works out. And the size difference, Nate is going to be smaller than Jake Paul. And if he happens to get hit, we know that Jake is strong. And,
right.
So I would respectfully not watch this because it's now progressed. Even though the weed thing, not something normally that comes up or think about. I think in Vegas it's recreationally allowed, so he can go to Vegas now for press conferences when he was with UFC and stuff, and that's kind of why you saw him during his last time with the UFC, kind of like at press conferences with a joint lighting up, and the memes of him lighting up and stuff. It's because he can't.
Yep.
So we'll see. We're about to see another circus, and if the problem here is that Nate had so much cred that he's going to give Jake Paul that Jake Paul still doesn't deserve by beating a stressed out 38-year-old Nate Diaz.
Right.
What I mean? So he's going to get more credit for the win than he deserves, and Nate's got a lot of cred to give up. you mentioned how the odds are skewed. I believe you're right. The bottom line is Jake Paul has 20 million Instagram followers. That's a lot of people who don't know boxing.
Right.
It's a lot of people who don't know boxing. And Nate himself brings 12 million followers or 8 million or something, another absurd number.
Right. Yeah, we looked it up at one point. Sure.
So the bottom line there is that's a lot of, Nate's got a lot of cred. And even in Jake's game and in Jake's world, Nate's, he's putting some of his street cred and some of his cred on the line. He's going to lose to a non-fighter, and he can be mad and, beat up reporters for bringing it up or, do whatever he wants to do. But the bottom line here is Nate Diaz is the one who's been fighting since he was a kid. Nate Diaz is the one who lives and breathes fighting. It's almost like it's a job for him, and it's almost like he transcends during a fight. That's his moment. That's his time. It always has been that way throughout his whole career, having to make himself. And now he's going to go give that away to a guy who's got 3 years in the game. So he better win. He better win because, his credit probably would stand this. But he better win because it will go much better for him if his intent to go back to the UFC is what he's going to do. He should come off a win, or else he's going to be going back to a 20-20 offer, in my opinion.
Yep, I just found it. It's at 2.2 million on Twitter, recently rebranded as X. But 2.2 million for Nate Diaz.
Keep in mind, Instagram's the ones that pay out. I think Instagram.
That's right.
So Instagram, I think he was closer to 12. But
I think you're right. We looked him up. You're right. I forgot. We looked him up on Instagram last time, and he's 6.5 million on Instagram. So there you go. That with the 2.2, you're looking at 9 million total or whatnot.
No. Nate Diaz probably has more followers, likes and stuff like that than any other MMA fighter short of McGregor.
Yeah.
So you take that for what it's worth. He's gonna, if he doesn't go into this fight and win, and circumstances aren't perfect for him to win, and he's not, he has some cred that he's gonna lose. Not a lot. I mean, he's still Nate Diaz, and he's gonna be retiring soon. But going back to UFC, it's not cool for him to lose this. This is not one that you would expect to lose. He's facing a guy who's not a pro fighter, and he's a pro fighter. Do your job.
True. Let me ask you this then, a devil's advocate. Why, let me say, was the same true, or why was it not true for Anderson Silva?
And Tyrone Woodley and stuff like that.
Right.
The problem with Anderson is that Anderson, I believe, did not come in with the intent of murder like he did when he was, facing Dan Henderson in the UFC title defense.
Okay. You don't have to come in with intent to murder to beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. these days. He beat him on points,
Yeah. And I think that's with Anderson, that he's at the point where it's a competition for him. He was Anderson. Yeah, Jake Paul dropped him. I think he went home with his money. His life changed. He was never in any danger. He got dropped. He's not ashamed since that fight. Please, he's laughed all the way to the bank. And
I didn't mention Tyrone because as much as I like Tyrone, it's pretty obvious why he lost. He's not. The way he stands, his form, his defense, it's just not built for boxing.
Yeah, he's a wrestler. Nate, he's a better boxer. That's in comparison, because Nate, if they box, Nate would box his ears off. So
right, yeah.
Yeah, like I said, Nate, hey, look, if his boxing doesn't hold up because it turns out he's an MMA guy and Jake Paul has surpassed him, then, I wonder, because a lot of that credit is based on these guys who have been fighting their whole lives, and, and they've always, not a lot of people know they seek out Andre Ward to stand in as partners for him so that so that they can drink that up. But they've done that, you know. So, and in jiu-jitsu, they were always top shelf guys. And, you know, if you look at their entourage of Melendez and Jake Shields, and those are lifelong teammates, you know, very loyal stuff there and things like that. And I just think all those guys together, you know, now ask them. So what if Nate loses to this guy who's been in the fight game 3 years? See how all that core people will respond. They won't think it's possible.
Right.
Like that. The guy's not a pro, but he's not. He's not a pro fighter, despite that he got his name on BoxRec, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm. So then you look at, I mean, you know, if you look at the value in it, then you go with either Jake Paul by knockout is minus 135, because you're not going to bet him at minus 550 at money line. So you're going to go with Jake Paul minus 135 for the knockout, or Diaz knockout for plus 700. Do you think Diaz can win on points?
Look, my thought is that Diaz is at his best when he's coming full, especially in a boxing style. If he can get to the point where he's volume punching, and volume punching
right.
is getting his points in and just kind of dominating the pace. He can wear Jake out, and that I think is his path. You know, use the body shots, the variety of punching and angles that he can bring that, you know, we've seen him do, and, you know, see how it goes from there. And
outscore him in enough rounds to win.
Yeah, and because he's a smaller guy, maybe Jake Paul, you know, has a chance, and you know, can withstand it and doesn't get knocked out. Like Nate by knockout at plus 700, you want to take a stab at it and put a little bit of money on there just in case. I think, but if you think Nate's going to win, I think Nate's best shot is you know, setting the pace for the fight at a high level and making Jake Paul stay with you and hurting him.
Yeah.
Punch,
so by decision would be plus 800, but if you're going to split and do both of those, you go back to money line at plus 350, and that's, I mean, actually, technically, mathematically, if you were going to put, you know, let's say $10 on the plus 350, you'd get $35 back. That'd be a $45 victory altogether, $45. If we split that 10 and did 5 on the plus 800 and 5 on the plus 700, your return on that plus 800 for the $5 would be $40. So you would make $5 more bucks. You make a small percentage more by splitting your bet. So whatever you want to put on money line, whether it's 10 or 100 or 1,000, mathematically you should probably split it between the points decision and the KO, for the fact that Miguel is leaning towards that points decision. Now at the plus 700, you would get paid exactly the same as the plus 350 because it's double the payout, but you're betting half your bit. But then if the decision hits, you get a little bonus. So again, folks, mathematically, don't bet Nate Diaz by money line. If you are inclined to bet Diaz by money line, split your bet, half on points decision and half on the knockout. When the decision happens, you'll make a little bit more than you would have on the money line. So
yeah, man, there you go. That's why Anthony Scott Piatt makes the big bucks. You see what I'm saying? You know, good. That's good advice there. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it. But again, this is just transcended for me. It's transcended more into that spectacle, not sports stuff anymore. So anything can happen. And you know, there's no buzz in that for me anymore. I like to see competition.
Yeah, that's the truth. I mean, look, we're talking about this fight. It's the only fight going, and Amanda Serrano's fighting, and I mean, Jake's made an impact for one way or the other, and Nate Diaz is a character we want to follow, but it's all a little begrudgingly. These things you mentioned, there's a guy on there named Ashton on FanDuel, but he's listed as H2O on your listing. It's that KSI, influencer silliness where they all pick silly names, and and whatnot. So, if any of you happen to be watching because of the Jake Paul tag and you like those influencers, they're freaking awesome. Stick with us, subscribe and everything. If you're a normal boxing fan and watching it, aren't those people weird? Hey, look, however you get to boxing, we like it. Trust me. We want to build fans, casuals, and hardcores. But it is weird. A guy named H2O fighting a guy named Xbox 360 fighting a guy named, Johnny Rocket or something. I mean, it's the strangest things going on. And they're doing tag teams. They're tag team boxing now. It's just a bit much for me, Miguel, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, and once again, keep in mind that this is being done by non-professional boxers.
Right.
And that's what makes it more like, it's like, why don't we just get like a bunch of us, like 50 or close to 50 guys, and do like, 100-yard dashes and see if, what watching bad running,
Right.
So what's the point of watching bad boxing? And that's, to me, what goes on there. But this allows us, since we're in the circus mode, to transition into the latest WWE news.
Oh, yes.
Where, I do a podcast with a fellow named Todd Atkins. You can check his YouTube, Todd Atkins. And we do the Conspiracy Hour. And when the WWE and the UFC merged, I predicted exactly what they've just announced.
This is incredible, folks. Listen, focus on this for a second. Run this down, Miguel. This is great.
That the UFC and the WWE came into a merger came up a few months ago. And, what are we going to see here? And I predicted that the best way for them to capitalize right away, I was wrong because I thought they would build it up for WrestleMania. And they're going to unleash it at the WWE's Power Slam, SummerSlam event. So they're going to do it this summer. We're going to see it in August. Ronda Rousey has been tag teaming with Shayna Baszler. Baszler, another 25-fight MMA veteran that's a little older than Ronda, and also on the WWE roster has held belts and things. Top quality wrestler. They've been tag teaming together. Well, Shayna a couple of weeks ago attacked Ronda from behind and beat her up during a tag team match, and now they're the worst of enemies. And the WWE announces that they will fight under UFC rules at SummerSlam. I don't know
under UFC rules.
Or if they're going to lower the cage or whatever the deal is. Or it could be UFC rules, so we'll see close fist punching and kicks and low kicks, and they'll make it look like an MMA fight. But is there a predetermined outcome on this show?
Right, this is very interesting. Is there any bets here to be made? I mean...
Well, there's the bottom line is, yes, there will absolutely be bets on this because whether you like it or not, the sport books do take bets on this because the WWE as a corporation really does a good job in mixing things up. Keep in mind, they always have the ability to say, disqualification, and nobody wins their bet. Or a double count out and nobody wins their bet. So, but they will take action on this. It's just a thing of keeping up with the storyline and seeing how it goes. My belief is nothing will get settled at the summer event, and that they will drag that on. They've already done women in a cage match, but the official wrestling cage match. But, putting them at the end of the cage match also puts almost the cage on the level of, how do they want to market it? I think they extend it. And I think Shayna is the absolute best opponent for Ronda because they both, with their MMA background, they'll have the cred. And they can make it, if they're going to do it for real and not know who's going to win on the way out, Shayna's a little older, and but 42 versus 36, but they can make it look credible. I don't think they would have any gumption about hitting each other or anything like that. They do physical their whole lives. So we'll take bets on it, but there's a lot of questions open here, and once again, this is the opening salvo of what we're going to see with these connections. Anyway,
it's interesting, very interesting.
With Ronda, she's the big box office draw, so I believe at the end she's going to win the feud with Shayna, but I think drag it out. In which case, all bets are off. Shayna could win the first fight.
Absolutely.
Or there could be some type of kooky disqualification. Sometimes they let the disqualification. Sometimes you can catch a good number on some of these wrestling ones. I think you do got to be a wrestling fan, though. You got to watch the story and get the feel for it. There'll be ebbs and flows. This is what they do, folks. This is what this
Miguel, we don't have any confirmation. Now, when they say UFC rules, but if you're having a WWE match with UFC rules, there's still no guarantee that it's not fixed, as you sort of pointed out already. There's no guarantee that it's not predetermined. Right. But if they come out and say this is actually going on Ronda's UFC record, and it's UFC judges and UFC, right? They bring in the UFC completely to run it, the whole bit, and verify. I mean, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think they're going to clarify that this is an official pro UFC match? I mean, UFC rules, but is this going to be on Ronda's record? Because if it's going to be on her record, they surely can't predetermine something that's going to be on someone's official UFC record. That would seem really beyond to me.
Yeah. I think you just hit the path, for the real people who want to know will know. They, if they're going to do a real fight, it would have to be sanctioned by the boxing commission. Once they say no, it's a predetermined outcome, then they don't need to involve the boxing commission. Now, they could try to pull the boxing commission in as part of the theatrical show, do the weigh-ins and that whole aspect, which you don't really get in professional wrestling. You don't get weigh-ins in pro wrestling. So, how much of the theatrics are they going to allow and borrow? Now, keep in mind, this match has just been announced for this weekend. So, it's not like they were training for it or... and there are many ways they could do it. In pro wrestling, obviously everybody understands that you're looking at matches in a ring. And in the pro wrestling modern era where, they take the show to the next level, the WWE has long done cage fights where the cage is actually hangs above the ring, and when the time comes, they lower it.
That's right. Yep.
Could do something like that, like the octagon. They'd have to move the ring and lower an octagon, or I don't know theatrically how they're going to do it, if the octagon is going to play it, or if it's just going to be, you'll know right away. I think UFC in general is going to be required to be in the octagon. That is their stage. And this would just be some type of special rules MMA fight in the wrestling banner. But still, I think you'll see, the full UFC highlight package for both women. I think Shayna did some time on the TV show as well, with the UFC and things. So, but Ronda's going to be, they now have full access to the UFC's library to hype this matchup. So that's
right. All the film packages and all of it. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting for sure. I didn't realize that's this weekend though. The actual fight is this.
I'm glad I looked it up because it's actually it's scheduled for SummerSlam, which is August 5th.
Because I mean, we're just hitting August here, and I thought I heard you maybe say October, but I guess you said August, and then we're in August. You're right. Yeah.
I knew that it was the summer event. I thought it was at the end of August. I didn't realize it was
end of August.
But they started the feud out only a couple of weeks ago when Shayna jumped her on the television.
It's a very interesting and quick development. With that development, we can guess that it's not fully sanctioned and it's not going to be on her record. I mean, you can't put a fight together that quick and get sort of all, I wouldn't imagine. Let's just put it that way. I can't imagine this being an official pro MMA on the record fight. I don't see that with a 1 week notice.
They did not even try. But later on, then I believe some of that will come where they will try to blur the lines. Like I said, in UFC, everybody's accustomed to the weigh-ins the day before, and that's a good spot, to get some hype going. That doesn't happen in pro wrestling. Will they use that tradition in the pro wrestling scene and try to build it up. It'll be interesting to see all the angles that they take on this. And,
yeah, you're right that it could bring something new to their hype.
Yeah, and putting it on the record, yeah, I think that's a stretch. I think you won't see the Sherdogs, accepting this as a legit MMA fight. But down the line, like I said, you're open to them blowing some light.
I want to give a shout out. We got the greatest movies up here because we're looking at pound for pound. I want to go back to that. The greatest fighters, Inoue and Crawford. Just shout out to a couple folks on Twitter that follow along and sometimes go with and sometimes go against. All Around Hustle being one. Had a lot of great conversations with the guy. He was big on Spence, but he came around and came back and said, hey, I got that one wrong. And he said, hey, that's the last time I'm going against you. You know what I mean? I said, hey, I put it up as a testimonial. And look, it's true. We don't sell anything. We like boxing. We like money. So follow along, tell your friends, subscribe, do the stuff, whether we're on Sharps or Twitter or wherever, do follow along. Boxing is a business. Another fun account on Twitter. Boxing is a business. Now, this was an interesting one, Miguel, because prior to the fights, Inoue and Crawford, he shared our pick, said I'm tailing, and shared it with everyone. And then afterwards, he said, look, this parlay was never in doubt. Appreciate you Piatt picks. It was the straight cash, homie. So, hey, appreciate you too. Boxing is a business. All Around Hustle. Tony, Ray, I hope you're doing all right. Keep your head up. There's a lot of folks out there. Cameron, Blake. I got the Dirty Dozen. People been with me a long time. We're over 1,000 followers on Twitter, and really only just built that up over the past few months since we relaunched the very podcast that you're watching here. Originally Cage Rage, then Wage Rage. Here we are, Wage Rage presents Piatt Picks. So, hey, that's it. It's been a lot of fun, and some people are starting to follow us, Miguel. So I just wanted to shout that out for them.
Absolutely, for sure. And, we're going to get this out here early in the week. We got Paul and Diaz this weekend, but I got big news that Anthony skipped over here a little bit.
Now, what'd I skip?
About an hour ago, we were prepping for this, and Bet USA literally had 2 fights. But
yep.
Once we signed on the tape, there are now 15 new fights on Bet USA. So we're gonna let Anthony go off and do his magic, and we're gonna see if on top of the Jake Paul stuff, we do have an 8-spot parlay to pick up where we left off on that stuff. I'm hoping Anthony comes through and sees enough fights to put one together, and we'll see it. He's got 15 fights to choose from. I think it was 9 on Friday and 6 on Saturday.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I Bet US is where we make our locks. I was looking at FanDuel, and they only had Serrano and Paul, the 2 fights. As I was prepping for this show, when we logged on, then there was 9 Friday fights on FanDuel and 6 Saturday fights. So I assume that Bet US, here's hoping, has also popped those up. They usually have more than FanDuel. So it all just happened as we were on air, as they say, folks. So we're going to try and dig into this and come up with one. We've made our first 100 lock picks on Bet US and finished 96-4. So we're going to see if we can start another run. And it's just been dry for a few weeks. Even as good as last week was, they had the marquee fights, but not a lot of the undercards. So just is what it is. But we're going to look into it, and fingers crossed, we'll have some lock pick and a lock 8-leg parlay for you this time around.
That's what it's all about. ASP, that's the bread and butter. So hopefully we get back on track with something to look at. Hopefully Bet US even adds another couple fights for you tomorrow.
That's right. What I like right now is Amanda Serrano by decision. That's my sort of bet of the week thus far. And we talked about Jake Paul, Nate Diaz. There's some value there again in those, and possibly great value in Nate Diaz if he can pull it off. Possibly Jake Paul on the knockout if you're feeling either one of those. Be careful with that fight. It's an interesting fight. The Amanda Serrano one I feel pretty good about by decision at plus 130.
And with that, check in by Thursday for more videos. And the fights are Saturday, and that's what we're all looking for, including some of this WWE stuff that's now worth looking at.
It's what a crazy combos we're getting here, all the mashups, but we'll take it. We'll take it. Let's grow it all together. Let's do this.